In this tutorial, I will show you how to set up recursive relationships using Microsoft Visio, the database model tool, as well as how to set up supertype, subtype relationships. So first, a quick preview of what these relationships are, just to refresh your memory. So going back to my PowerPoint slide here. So this is the relational database design that I have been using for the past 3 tutorials with Visio. So let me switch to a different slide here. First, let's discuss what recursive relationships are. So I'm going to just pick up on the employee entity, okay? So here was our database relational database design, and I'm just going to pick up the one entity here called employee, and discuss what we mean by recursive relationships. So a recursive relationship is a relationship that an entity has with itself, but that recursive relationship can be of a couple of different types. So here you see a one-to-one relationship of employee with itself. So you can see this relationship line connecting employee to itself here. Okay, it starts and ends on the employee, but it's one-to-one. Do you see? The maximum cardinalities are 1 on both ends, and that's because the relationship is one of spouse. Okay, so at any one time you can only have one spouse in most places. So employee is related to itself through the relationship spouse, and you can see that the primary key is employee number. The foreign key, the only mechanism you have to set up relationships in the relational database design is to use foreign keys. That's the only mechanism you have. Hence, the primary key is employee number. The foreign key is also an employee number, since the table is connecting to itself, but you give it a different name so that the meaning becomes clear. So the employee number that you see in this column is the ID number of the spouse. Okay. So this is a recursive relationship of employee with itself, but the relationship is one of spouse. Okay. So let me show you another recursive relationship. Here you have employee related to itself also, but this relationship is general. Okay. So for instance, I could have a cousin working in the same company. I could have a brother working in the same company. I could have a sister working in the same company, maybe a distant cousin working in the same company. So I could be related to many other persons in the company through some kind of relationship, okay, other than spouse. Okay, so that's why this is a many-to-many relationship. Okay, one employee can be related to many other employees and vice versa. Okay, so this is a recursive relationship, but a many-to-many, unlike the first one that we discussed, which is one-to-many. So again, when you do the relational database design, the only mechanism that you have is to use foreign keys, and the foreign key can only represent a one-to-many relationship. So this many-to-many relationship of employee to itself is represented by a pair of one-to-many relationships, and you have to create this new associative entity. Okay, so I'm not going over the theory all over again. This is just to refresh your memory. We have gone over this theory elsewhere in the class, so just keep this concepts in mind as I show you how to use Visio to draw these relationships. I'll start with the simpler one first, and that's the spousal relationship, which is one-to-one. So here we are in the Visio relational database design, and I'm going to add one by one these different relationships. So before I can add a recursive relationship, the spousal relationship to employee, you know by now that I have to manually put in a foreign key. So let me do that first. So I highlight employee, and I put in another column called spouse ID. Okay, so you remember that here's the PowerPoint slide. So there was this foreign key called spouse ID, and I've just put that in. So manually I've put in the foreign key. The spouse ID is basically the same as the employee number, but the role that it plays is one of spouse. So now I'm in a position to set up my relationship. So I bring the relationship tool. Okay, so one end I connect to employee, and the other end I also connect to employee, because it's a relationship of employee to itself. Okay, so now let me just make a little space here. So now that we have set up the relationship connector from employee to itself, that's over here, we need to formalize this relationship by specifying which is the primary key and which is the foreign key that constitutes this relationship. After all, in a relational database design, the foreign key, as I said repeatedly, is the only tool you have to set up relationships. So you have seen this step before. So I highlight emp number, which is the primary key in employee, and the relationship spouse, it connects to the attribute called spouse ID. Once again, spouse ID is an attribute in employee itself. That's how the entity is connected to itself. So once I've highlighted these two attributes, I click on associate, meaning I'm telling Visio associate these two attributes. And as soon as I've done that, you can see that these two have been connected. Now let me take the highlighting away, and you can see this relationship well. It's almost there. Let's look at the PowerPoint slide once again. You can see that I've set up the relationship of employee to itself, but it's a one-to-one relationship, isn't it? It's not a one-to-many relationship. And at the moment, the default relationship that Visio always sets up is one-to-many, and then you can go back and change the cardinalities at any time. So let me highlight that relationship once again, and then under miscellaneous, you know that to set this up as right now it's 0 or more. That's the default. I set it up as 0 or 1. Okay, so now I take this highlight off, and you can see that I have set up a one-to-one relationship of employee to itself, and this relationship is the spousal relationship. And you know how to change the name. So I can highlight the relationship here, and if I go to name, and instead of has, I can write spouse of, and you can see that name shows up in the relationship line. Now if that clutters up your diagram, then of course you can go to display options and then turn this verb phrase off, say don't display the name, and it will take the names out, and you get a cleaner diagram. Okay, so let's continue with the second type of recursive relationship that you can have, that is a many-to-many relationship of employee to itself. So one employee is related to many other employees. So this is not the spousal relationship. Since it's a many-to-many, I need to have this associative entity created first. So let me set that up. So I go back to Visio and I bring this new entity. Now notice I'm going to drop this off in this blank space, and Visio automatically makes space for me, just generates more paper. So I will call this relationship. I forgot what the name is of the entity. It's called employee relationship. Okay, so I'll just call it emp relationship. Okay, and now I can define the columns, so the attributes. So going back to my slide, so I have two attributes which are the primary key. So this is a composite primary key because it's a many-to-many relationship of employee to itself. So I'll set these two attributes up, and just again to save myself typing, I will call them emp1 ID and emp2 ID. So here is emp1 ID. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn the caps lock off. So emp1 ID, and I'll say required primary key. So you can see emp1 ID has been set up as a primary key. Then I will do emp2 ID and also specify it as required and primary key. So now I have a composite primary key. It looks like what I have in the slide. Okay. So notice that I still haven't set up the foreign keys as the linkages. Those will come later gradually. But there is another attribute called relationship type, meaning if I say that two employees are related, I also want to say, are they brothers, sisters, cousins? What is the type of relationship? So the third attribute here we'll type is type, and we'll leave it as character. Okay, so right now I have the associative entity set up. It looks like this box, this rectangle over here, that is the associative entity. Now I'm going to connect employee to this associative entity twice, and each time it will be a one-to-many relationship. So let's do that. So I bring in the relationship tool and drop it in here. So the one side I connect to employee, one side I connect to employee, and the many side I connect to employee relationship. Okay. So let me take the highlight off. So I'm saying that there is a one-to-many relationship from employee to this associative entity. Always remember that, the conversion rule that we had is a many-to-many relationship is converted to a pair of one-to-many relationship when you do the relational database design. So I've set this up. Now it looks almost like what we want to have. Again, look at the slide. But do you see this is an identifying relationship, meaning employee relationship exists only because employee exists. I have to make this a solid line, and the cardinalities have to be 1 on the employee side. So let's go back to my Visio diagram. I'll highlight this relationship. Okay, and in miscellaneous, I will specify that it is an identifying type of relationship. Okay, so do you see it's made the line solid, and it's got crow's feet at the other end, which is what I want. So I'm getting closer to the picture that I want. So I got one of these links set up. I'm going to set up the other one, but notice something that has happened as a result of this, an automatic step. As soon as I set up this one-to-many relationship, Visio automatically put in a foreign key by itself. Okay, and that is the emp number. It will do the same every time you do a one-to-many relationship. This is an automatic step that Visio does, and we'll go back later and delete that. Okay, so let me put in the second one-to-many relationship here, the second link over here. So I go back to Visio, I take my relationship tool, drop it in here. The one side goes to employee, the many side goes to employee relationship as before, and once again I specify this to be an identifying type of relationship. So I have the line, the two relationships set up as I want them, so they look very close to where I want to be, where I want to get, but small corrections are required now. So I have set up the lines, but I need to tell Visio what the primary and foreign key pairs are so that it knows what those lines stand for. So again, let me highlight one of the relationships. Then I go to definition, and now I'm going to tell Visio that this one-to-many relationship consists of employee number as the primary key of employee, and it should connect to the first emp ID of the child. So this employee number should connect to the first employee ID. Okay, and then I tell Visio associate these two. Okay, and as soon as I've done that, do you see that it has made employee ID both the primary and the foreign key? So I'm gradually getting closer to what I want. Do you see this picture that I'm trying to get to? The employee ID one is both the primary and the foreign key, because the primary key is composite. So in this entity, the primary key is composite and they're two separate foreign keys. Okay, coming back to this diagram now. So for this second relationship, now when I highlight this, I'm telling, so as of now, you can see Visio doesn't know what is the primary and foreign key of this relationship. This line is not complete yet, right? So I'm going to tell Visio this relationship has emp number as its primary key here, and its foreign key should be employee 2, the second employee 2. That is what the foreign key should be. So now I tell Visio, please associate these two attributes, and you can see immediately it made employee 2 as a foreign key. Okay, so all that remains now is this residual emp number that Visio had put in automatically. I just have to go back to the emp relationship entity and delete the emp number that Visio had put in on its own. So here is emp number, that's this last attribute over here that had been put in automatically, and I remove. Okay, so here is the many-to-many relationship that you have between employee and itself. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint slide. Here you have your many-to-many relationship. Okay, so what I have just shown you is how to set up a one-to-many recursive relationship and a many-to-many recursive relationship using Visio. Of course, you can hand draw these things, but this is how you would do it in Visio. Now, the last thing that I'm going to show you in Visio is how to draw supertype subtype relationships. And again, let me get back to the PowerPoint slide. So if you remember from our theory discussion, a supertype subtype relationship is where you have an entity that really consists of multiple categories, and you want to represent the categories separately as part of employees. So if you look at this diagram here, you have an entity, a rectangle called employee, okay? But these employees are of different types. So you have hourly employee, salaried employee, consultant, and the attributes of hourly employee, salaried employee, consultants are a little bit different. So when you use supertype subtypes, what you do is the common attributes are put in the supertype, the parent entity, and the attributes that are unique to each category are put in the subtype. So all I'm going to do is set up this diagram in Visio. So imagine that this employee really consists of three categories that you saw in the PowerPoint slide, and I'm going to set up these three categories. Okay, so these three categories are nothing but entities, but special types of entities in that they belong to employee. So let me set up these three first. So I'll first drop in an entity here, and I'll call it HREMP, meaning hourly employee. That's the hourly employee. Okay, and for the moment I'm not going to put in any primary key. I'm just going to put in this attribute called hourly rate. The attribute hourly rate is unique to an hourly employee. It doesn't apply to a salaried employee, obviously. So let me put in a column called HRLY rate. Oh, it's forgot to put off the caps lock. So HRLY rate, and I'll make it a number, so integer, and let's make it required. So we should have a required for. Okay, so I have this entity called hourly employee. Now notice that there is no primary key yet. Okay, and we'll get to that in a minute. So the second type of employee is salaried employee, and I will introduce a new entity and call it SalEmp. Okay, and let's put in the two attributes that have been given to us. One is the annual salary, the other is the stock option. Okay, so annual salary, let's make that an integer, required, and then we'll say stock options. Again, let's make that an integer, but we won't make it required, meaning not everybody gets a stock option. Not every salaried employee gets a stock option. So notice once again, I didn't put in any primary key. Now the last type of employee that we have is consultant. So let me put in this entity called consultant, the name. So I go to definition and I put in the name as, oops, let me make it capitalized, consultant. And let's see what the attributes are. The attributes are contract number and billing rate. So I'll just put in contract number, and we'll make it an integer, and billing rate, I will also make it an integer. Okay, so notice I have put in the three subtypes. The super type is employee, and here are the three subtypes. So every employee belongs to one of these three types of subcategories. Okay, so now I'm going to connect employee to these three types of subcategories of employees. In this, it'll end up looking like this. So you have three categories of employees, and that's what I'm trying to draw now in Visio. So the first thing I need to draw is to bring in the category symbol. So I'm telling Visio, hey, I'm about to introduce a category. Okay, so there'll be different categories of employees. So that's what the category symbol looks like. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the parent to the category, and I'm going to connect each of the children to the categories. And that will set up the tree that you saw in the PowerPoint slide. So I need a little T here. Okay, so, and as I connect each subtype to the category, notice what happens to the primary key. Okay, so let's do this step by step. So do you see this tool here which says parent to category? That's the tool I will use. It just looks like a line, but one end of the line I'll connect to the parent, which is employee. The other end I'll connect to the category. Okay, so now Visio knows that I've connected the parent to the category. Nothing has happened here for the primary keys yet. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is pick up this other tool which says category to child. Okay, so this line I'm going to use to connect the category to each child in turn. So here is my connection to category, and here I connect. Okay, and notice what immediately happened as soon as I told Visio that, hey, hourly employee is a subcategory of employee. That means hourly employee must have emp number as its primary and foreign key. So it put that in automatically, do you see? And that's why I didn't bother to put it in at the beginning. So now I just complete the other two. So here is my other line. I connect this to category and this end to sale. So here's the second category and the third category. Here's the line. One end connects to category, the other end connects to consultant. Okay, so you can see in each case the employee number, primary key of employee, got shifted down, got copied down automatically to the three subcategories because each of these subcategories is a type of employee. Okay, all right, so I've shown you how to do these different types of relationships in a relational database design using Visio, and I hope you will find them helpful.